Rex Tillerson is about to announce the new executive order on immigration. Let's listen in.
Protecting the nation from foreign terrorist entry into the United States is a vital measure for strengthening our national security. It is the President's solemn duty to protect the American people. And with this order, President Trump is exercising his rightful authority to keep our people safe. As threats to our security continue to evolve and change, common sense dictates that we continually reevaluate and reassess the systems we rely upon to protect our country. While no system can be made completely infallible, the American people can have high confidence we are identifying ways to improve the vetting process and thus keep terrorists from entering our country. To our allies and partners around the world, please understand this order is part of our ongoing efforts to eliminate vulnerabilities that radical Islamist terrorists can and will exploit for destructive ends. The State Department will coordinate with other federal agencies and implement these temporary restrictions in an orderly manner. Our embassies and consulates around the world will play an important role in making sure that our nation is as secure as it can be. And the State Department will implement the provisions in this order that allow for the admissions of refugees when it is determined they do not pose a risk to the security or welfare of the United States. Upon the President's initial executive order issued on January the 27th, the State Department's Consular Affairs and Diplomatic Security offices immediately undertook a review in coordination with the Department of Homeland Security to identify additional measures that would strengthen our vetting of those seeking entry to the United States from 7 named countries. These early efforts were concentrated on Iraq. Iraq is an important ally in the fight to defeat ISIS, with their brave soldiers fighting in close coordination with America's men and women in uniform. This intense review over the past month identified multiple security measures that the State Department and the government of Iraq will be implementing to achieve our shared objective of preventing those with criminal or terroristic intent from reaching the United States. I want to express my appreciation to Prime Minister al-Abadi of Iraq for his positive engagement and support for implementing these actions. The United States welcomes this kind of close cooperation with countries in every region of the world who share our commitment to national security. This revised order will bolster the security of the United States and her allies. Now, we've spent the morning briefing the Congress, the press, and we will continue to talk with key stakeholders this afternoon. Experts from the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, and the State Department hosted an hour-long call with the media on this topic this morning. Our collective teams will continue throughout the day to follow up with the Congress, the media, and stakeholders to answer your questions. I'll now turn it to the Attorney General for his comments.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and good morning to all of you. One of the Justice Department's top priorities is to protect the United States from threats to our national security. Therefore, I want to discuss 2 points. First, the national security basis of this order, and second, the Department of Justice's role in defending the lawful orders of the President of the United States. First, as President Trump noted in his address to Congress, the majority of people convicted in our courts for terrorism-related offenses since 9/11 came here from abroad. We also know that many people seeking to support or commit terrorist acts will try to enter through our refugee program. In fact, today more than 300 people, according to the FBI, who came here as refugees are under an FBI investigation today for potential terrorism-related activities. Like every nation, the United States has a right to control who enters our country and to keep out those who would do us harm. This executive order seeks to protect the American people as well as lawful immigrants by putting in place an enhanced screening and vetting process for visitors from 6 countries. 3 of these nations are state sponsors of terrorism. The other 3 have served as safe havens for terrorist countries where governments have lost control of their territory to terrorist groups like ISIL or Al-Qaeda and its affiliates. This increases the risk that people are admitted here from these countries may belong to terrorist groups or may have been radicalized by them. We cannot compromise our nation's security by allowing visitors entry when their own governments are unable or unwilling to provide the information we need to vet them responsibly, or when those governments actively support terrorism. This executive order responsibly provides a needed pause. We can carefully review how we scrutinize people coming here from these countries of concern. Second, the Department of Justice believes that this executive order, just as the first executive order, is a lawful and proper exercise of presidential authority. This Department of Justice will defend and enforce lawful orders of the President consistent with the core principles of our Constitution. The executive is empowered under the Constitution and by Congress to make national security judgments and to enforce our immigration policies in order to safeguard the American public. Terrorism is clearly a danger for America and our people. The President gets briefings on these dangers and emerging threats on a regular basis. The federal investigative agencies, the intelligence community, the Department of State, the Department of Homeland Security, and the United States military report to the President. Knowing the President would best possess such extensive information, our founders wisely gave the executive branch the authority and the duty to protect the nation. This executive order is a proper exercise of that power. Now, I will turn things over to our able Secretary John Kelly of the Department of Homeland Security. John?
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General.
Well, like the Secretary of State and the Attorney General, I welcome you here today. My comments will be relatively brief. Last week, the Department of Homeland Security celebrated its 14th anniversary, first opening its doors on 1 March 2003. This Secretariat was established in response to the devastating attacks of September 11th, when foreign terrorists turned a beautiful but ordinary day into a nightmare. Those attacks taught us that we could not take our nation's security for granted, that Homeland Security must be our top priority, and that we needed to overcome our collective inability to connect the dots of intelligence and arrange them into a more comprehensive picture of the threats posed to America and our way of life. Though much has changed over the past 14 years, both in the world that is more dangerous and at DHS, which is much better. The fact remains that we are not immune to terrorist threats and that our enemies often use our own freedoms in generosity against us. Today's executive order, which President Trump signed this morning, will make America more secure and address long overdue concerns about the security of our immigration system. We must undertake a rigorous review and are undertaking a rigorous review of our immigration vetting programs to increase our confidence in the decisions we make relative to visitors and immigrants that travel to the United States. We cannot risk the prospect of malevolent actors using our immigration system to take American lives. This executive order is prospective in nature. Its focus is on preventing the entry of new foreign nationals from the 6 designated countries. Accordingly, it is important to note that nothing in this executive order affects existing lawful permanent residents or persons with current authorization to enter our homeland. Unregulated, unvetted travel is not a universal privilege, especially when national security is at stake. The White House worked closely with the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, and the Department of State to create an order that addresses previous concerns and protects the homeland and every one of our citizens. The men and women of the Department of Homeland Security, like their brothers and sisters throughout law enforcement, are decent men and women of character and conscience. They are no less so than the governors of our states and territories, of our senators and members of Congress, of our city mayors and various advocacy groups. These men and women are sworn to enforce the laws as passed by the United States Congress and would be in violation of the law in their sworn oaths if they did not do so. We do not make the law, but are sworn to enforce it. We have no other option. We are going to work closely to implement and enforce it humanely, respectfully, and with professionalism, but we will enforce the law. I want to thank the President for his leadership on this issue and for his steadfast support for our important law enforcement, security, and counterterrorism mission. Again, as previously mentioned, I have spent much of the day today on the phone with members of Congress, the leadership, explaining the ins and outs of this EO, and I did the same thing last week. So there should be no surprises, whether it's in the media or on Capitol Hill. Thanks very much, and thanks for your time.
Is this an acknowledgement that the first order was flawed in many ways and not well thought
Mr. Attorney
through?
General, have you spoken to FBI Director Comey today?
Are Christians still given priority under this executive order for review?
A trio of the power players in the Trump administration, the Homeland Security Director there, John Kelly, along with the Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Attorney General Jeff Sessions, announcing the new travel ban as implemented by the Trump administration. Let's get back to our panel, Matt Visor and Rich Lowry. Rich, did you hear anything there that gives you confidence that the courts are going to look with a kinder eye on this travel ban?
Well, I was struck by a couple things. One, having this announced by 3 cabinet secretaries reinforces the message that they have their ducks in a row this time. This has been carefully coordinated among all agencies of government. 2, they're exempting Iraq. The inclusion of Iraq in the first order didn't seem to make a lot of sense, given that we're waging a war with Iraq against ISIS. And Attorney General Sessions went out of his way to say the FBI is investigating 300 refugees for suspicion of terroristic activities, which goes to the weak defense that the Department of Justice mounted initially of the first executive order, where lawyers didn't even seem to know what the answer was when judges asked, well, what's the threat we're addressing here? So they're still going to have a problem with the courts. They're still going to have a problem with activist courts, but this is much more buttoned up and should be much more defensible.
To that point, Matt, the Attorney General gave a pretty vocal defense of the actions that are being taken here, saying the Department of Justice believes it is in the president's authority to protect the nation, and that's the source of these orders.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I agree with Rich. I mean, I think that the rollout of this is far different from the rollout of the initial executive order. You also, as I understand it, have a 10-day period before a lot of this is implemented. So you have time. You heard Secretary Tillerson emphasize that they are talking to the public, they're talking to members of Congress, they're talking to the media. There's a much different emphasis on how this is rolled out. It's still to be seen. There's surely going to be court challenges to this, whether these changes sort of button up the legal aspects of it. You know, I'm not a legal expert, but it seems like they are meant to address some of the shortcomings of that initial executive order.
They also took pains to say that they briefed members of Congress, Rich, and that was something that apparently didn't get done the first time around.
Yeah, they just want everyone to know and to know what the new rules are so they can be implemented as smoothly as possible. And the courts shouldn't be making decisions on the basis of whether a rollout is chaotic or smooth, but unfortunately it does affect the perception of judges, and the administration didn't help its case with that chaotic first weekend. Now, I thought the first order was entirely legal and constitutional, and it was absurd that the Ninth Circuit threw it out, but this should, at least at the margins, help the administration's case going forward. And it was important to get out of that Ninth Circuit legal box canyon they are and try to reset this and fight it going forward on slightly different footing.
Matt, I guess I'm asking you to look at your crystal ball a little bit here, but you know, the media, the administration did not get treated well in the media as a result of that first rollout. There were a lot of editorials and so forth against it. How do you think this one's going to be received?
I mean, I think it'll be a little bit different because they've made pains to respond. I mean, I think the initial one, you also had those images in the days after of the airports and the protests there. So I think that you won't have that the same way this time. So I mean, I think the rollout is different here, and I think that changes public perception of some of the things that they're doing, even if it has some of the same aims. Also watch for how they talk about this. In the aftermath of that initial one, there was still talk of a Muslim ban. They seem to be taking pains to clarify that a little bit here, where it's not religious specific that the courts used. So I think watch that over the next couple of hours and days too.
Matt Visor, Boston Globe, Rich Lowry, National Review. Thank you
very much, John.
Thank you.
Just talked a little bit about the airports. The Trump administration's initial travel ban sparked an outcry, with protests erupting at airports across the country. A different scene right now at Washington's Dulles International Airport, minutes after President Trump signed that executive order, the revised one. Doug McKelvey's live there and joins us with more. Doug?
Hi, Jenna. No sign of disruption, no sign of protest here at Dulles International Airport, as we saw in the case of the last travel ban. But having been there on that occasion, I can say that the crowds generally start to build later in the afternoon, so we'll see what happens. There is one small table off in the distance here, the Justice Legal Foundation for Dulles Airport, staffed by about 4 people offering free legal advice. But really, there is nobody here at this point in time who needs any legal advice. We have to keep in mind that this new executive order does not take effect for another 10 days. Here's Kellyanne Conway.
It has an effective date of March 16th, and there are the legal permanent residents were always excluded from it, but that's made much more clear now. If you have travel docs, if you actually have a visa, if you're a legal permanent resident, you are not covered under this particular executive action.
Trump's original order temporarily blocked citizens from Iran, Iraq, Somalia, Sudan, Yemen, Syria, and Libya from coming to the United States. This now puts Iraq into an exempt category. And in a statement earlier in a conference call with reporters, DHS said about that, quote, Iraq will increase cooperation with the U.S. government on the vetting of its citizens applying for a visa to travel to the United States. As a result of this increased information sharing, Iraq citizens are not affected by the executive order. And in another change, Syrian citizens are now having to abide by the same standards as the other citizens, meaning a 120-day vetting period, not the permanent ban that they faced under the previous executive order. Jenna, back to you.
A few changes there. Doug, thank you very much. We'll continue to watch the reaction and be right back with more.